I do try to just realize that I have my limits and it's okay to not do it all. I think people get really wrapped up in a competition with themselves or
Yes.
even sometimes other people like, well, my sister did it last year. I'm going to do it better this year or something like
Right.
that. That's all useless because it doesn't help.
Welcome to Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. I'm your host, Nikki Sizemore, and in this podcast, we explore the rituals, traditions, and cultural influences around food and how food connects us and also sometimes disconnects us to our minds, our bodies, our spirits, the earth, and our communities. This is a space dedicated to bringing more presence, ease, and joy into the process of feeding ourselves. Let's dive in. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the show. I have such a delicious episode for you today, diving into everything Thanksgiving with my guest, David Leite. David is a 3-time James Beard Award-winning food writer. He's a cookbook author, and he publishes the acclaimed website Leite's Culinaria. He's the author of the books The New Portuguese Table and his memoir Notes on a Banana. And he also has a Substack newsletter. David describes his background growing up in a Portuguese-American household and how he found his way into food writing by finding his way back into his Portuguese heritage after resisting it for most of his youth. While David's family celebrated Thanksgiving, it wasn't the traditional Thanksgiving menu that you and I might be familiar with. It wasn't until David met his partner, Alan, 31 years ago that he started celebrating and then later hosting a traditional Thanksgiving dinner. David and I dive right into that. Both of us, I think, spent too many years of our lives stressing out over Thanksgiving. And these days, both of us plan menus that can be made almost entirely ahead so that when the holiday arrives, we can experience more ease and maybe pleasure. David shares his timeline, which starts the Saturday before Thanksgiving. He describes the dishes he makes and when he makes them. And I will include a link in the show notes to my Megahead Thanksgiving menu and timeline, which just happens to be all gluten-free. David also shares his tips for preparing for the holidays emotionally. We all know that this time of year can be so stressful. David is really open about talking about his bouts of depression, and he shares the tools that he uses to support himself when those heavy emotions start to creep in. And these tools are simple, but so incredibly powerful and beneficial for all of us, especially this time of year. As David emphasizes, it's critical that we know our personal limits and that it's okay not to do it all, or really to do any of it if you don't want to. Also, that we drop expectations this time of year and just allow things to be what they are. David lives by the motto, if I can't do it, I can't do it. And I absolutely love this. I'm going to adopt this for myself. If I can't do it, I can't do it. And that is perfectly okay. I think you're going to walk away from this episode, first of all, hungry for Thanksgiving dinner, but also with real strategies and real tips that you can use to bring more ease to the holidays this year. As always, you can support this work by rating it, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and you can subscribe to the Mind, Body, Spirit, Food newsletter where I feature weekly recipes and dive into these topics even further. If you become a paid subscriber for just a couple of dollars a month, you make this podcast happen. This is an ad-free podcast, and it could not happen without community support. Paid subscribers have access to the full recipe archive. They get bonus content and other fun perks. And finally, if you're looking for more support in the kitchen, I'm here to help. In my one-on-one coaching and cooking sessions, I work with clients to help them uncover their blocks and challenges around cooking and eating, to discover their unique digestion, tap into their intuition, and create meaningful shifts. If this work calls to you, I'll include all of the details in the show notes where you can book a session. I would so love to work with you. Okay, my friends, without further ado, let's jump into the show. Oh, David, thank you so much for being here. It's such a joy to have you on the show.
Sure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm just laughing because we had started this show and I realized I wasn't recording. So
Happened to me many times.
we're
I know.
starting over. The last time that you and I have spoken face to face was
Mhm.
20 years ago when I was a young little lass
Yeah.
living in New York City in
That's
culinary school.
Yes.
And I took a writing class from you. And
did.
so much has changed, I'm sure, for both of us. I certainly know for myself. And
Yeah.
it's such a joy to see you again and
thank you.
to reconnect. And I can't wait to hear all about the things you've been up to, as well as the topic we're going to dive into today, which is
All right.
Thanksgiving.
I just want to say that it's been a long time since we actually have seen each other, and your career has just exploded into a whole different stratosphere. So congratulations.
Thank
Really,
you so
congratulations.
much. Thank you. Well, I'm going to start by asking you the first question that I ask all of my guests so we can get to know you a little bit. And that is, what is your cultural upbringing and how has that influenced your relationship to food?
Okay. I am Portuguese. My family came from the Azores. My mom's side, my grandfather and grandmother were the first people who came over, became American. And my father is the one who came over on my dad's side. He's the first one. That was in 1957. And I was born 3 years later. So there's a real heavy old world traditions or roots in my family. So I grew up in a very Portuguese community in Fall River, Massachusetts. And I just thought everybody in the world was Portuguese. I knew nothing different. We went to
Really?
a Portuguese church. We went to Portuguese bakeries. We shopped at Portuguese butcher shops, everything. And so it heavily influenced me, but not in the way that you would think. Originally, I wanted nothing to do with being Portuguese because I wrote this in my memoir, Notes on a Banana, that when I would watch television, there was no representation.
Yeah.
There were no grandmothers wearing all black. People weren't eating octopus stew. There weren't 18 or 20 people around the table. And so I wanted so much to be an American that I tried to eschew anything Portuguese, much to the dismay of my parents. And that included food. I wanted to be American through and through. And that didn't work because my mother refused and my grandmother refused to do that. I had to eat Portuguese food. So it was inculcated very early in Portuguese culture and Portuguese cuisine, even though I didn't want to be. And I finally embraced it, though, after my grandmother died when I was 31 years old. Wow. Is when I thought, wow, okay, there's something here. And I'm missing out because when she died, a lot of recipes that she made disappeared with her because she never wrote them down. And my mom had her versions, but they were versions. They weren't my grandmother's dishes. And I then became very frightened that the foods that I had grown up with now would be lost for the ages. And that's how I got into food writing.
So that's at the age of 31. How
31.
Fascinating. Now, first of all, I just want you to share, if you don't mind, quickly. I went to Portugal for the first time this year.
Oh,
and
did
I
you
have
like it?
to say, I loved it. I loved it. And I was not familiar with Portuguese cuisine. So what are some of the standout dishes, or if you could just describe that cuisine for those of my listeners that might not know about it?
Sure. It's a very hearty cuisine. It's comida pobre, which is, it's poor food. It's food of the people, peasant food, if you will. And that's where the heritage in its lineage is. And so you'll have a lot of very hearty, warming soups like caldo verde, which is the kale soup. It's really thinly sliced kale, like whisker thin. And then it's stirred into a broth, and it's a puree of potatoes and sometimes a stock, sometimes just water or vegetable stock. And there's a lot of pork. Pork is king in Portugal. In the mainland, beef is king, or more so king, in the Azores. Because in Portugal, it's very arid. So pigs are easy to raise, as well as sheep and everything. And so pork and clams, Portuguese are great at combining seafood and meat. So it's pork and clams, lots of pork dishes, something called a sorda, which is a bread soup. And it's not quite what you think of when you think of bread soup. What they do is they get this day-old bread or 2-day-old bread, and they soak it in either water, usually water in the old days, but now it can be stock or seafood stock. And then they will cook a lot of seafood. This is the one that's a seafood, a sort of, and then they mix it all up. But what they do is they crack an egg open, a raw egg on top, and they mix it all in. And so it cooks when you're mixing it. And it enriches it, and it's wonderful. Fresh fish, blindingly fresh fish, because the seacoast. Sardines are huge there. Salt cod is huge, of course. So they say that there's 365 different recipes for salt cod. Actually, some people say 1,000. I don't know if there's that many, but salt cod is really huge. And wine, Portuguese wines are taking off. Some of the wines there are great. Of course, Portugal's known for port wine, which is up north in the Douro region, but also Madeira wine too, out in the island of Madeira. So the fortified wines were really big, but now the table wines. They're making a lot of table wines out of the varietals that they make port wine out of. Like Toniga Nacional is one of the varietals, and it's a superb grape. So those are some of the things I would say: the pork, the seafood, the salt cod, the very simple food of the people
Yeah.
is what traditional Portuguese food is.
Yeah, it's funny that I feel transported back there just in you describing it. That is the feeling of Portugal for me. And I thought the food was so fantastic. And the wines completely surprised me. I had never, like you said, I knew about the fortified wines. I did not think of Portugal as a wine growing region. And then you're there and the wines are just fantastic. And much like in France or Italy, so inexpensive and just so drinkable and so fresh. And oh, I can't wait to go back. So you're 31 years old and you...
I wish I were, but back in the day I was.
Your grandmother passes away and you all of a sudden have this renewed interest in your Portuguese upbringing.
Yeah.
Did you start writing about Portuguese food or was it just food in general?
About Portuguese food specifically. Because what I was trying to do was I was trying to capture my mom's recipes before, I know she passed. Now, my mom at that point was probably in her 50s, early 50s, but I wanted to capture them and also my aunt's recipes. So I would ask my mom for certain recipes over the phone and she'd give me the recipes and they would be disasters. And I never cooked at that point because I was young, thin, and beautiful and I ate practically nothing at that point. And so I would make them and they would fail. I'd ask her again and she would give it to me, maybe change it a bit, and it still failed. So I said, Mom, I'm going to go watch you do it. She said, okay. So I went there. I've written a lot about this, where she would show me what she was doing, but there was no measuring cups. There was nothing. It was, she put in the amount of salt she wanted, the amount of paprika, the amount of parsley, or whatever it is. There was no measurement and no dishes were the same twice. So that was frustrating. And I tried to go home and recreate them and I couldn't. So this is the days way before iPhones. This is when you had the video cameras, those big bulky things like this.
Yeah.
Right? And so I went there with a video camera.
Wow.
And I started filming her because I figured it'd be easier. In the process of filming her, she began to talk more about the foods and about the history of the food and the family. And I would ask questions and it became almost like an interview about the history. And I thought, this is a great idea. If somebody wants to capture the food of their family, why don't they videotape it? So I thought, hey, this could be a really good article. And I was in advertising at that point and I was kind of bored by it and I wanted some other creative outlet. So I remember I was told you pitch to publications. I didn't know what that was, but I took a class and figured out how to pitch. So I pitched the New York Times, the LA Times, and I don't know, through some sort of
started pretty small, didn't you?
I know, right? Yeah. I did not start at the local penny saver. And then for some reason in that mix, mathematically through the spreadsheet that I had, this Chicago Sun-Times kind of popped up at the top of the list. I pitched all three, nothing from the New York Times, nothing from the LA Times, surprise, but the Chicago Sun-Times was interested. And so I went ahead and I wrote it on spec. They liked it. They paid me. Went on the front page of the food section.
Wow.
It was the lead story. And when you're in advertising and you do I did like presidential campaigns. I did IKEA when it first came to America, Ford, Mercury, all these different brands. Your name never appears on anything you do, right? It was so wild to see my name on the front page associated with my words. So I became addicted. So I just started throwing out other ideas and my editor at the time was Sue Ontiveros there. I don't think she's there any longer. And Sue was like, yeah, whatever you want. So then the second piece I wrote, I think was on tea. The third piece I wrote was on the foods of the 20th century. It was 1999 in December. And it was such a long piece. It was about 4,000 words or 5,000 words. It was huge. It took up the entire center section, both pages and the front page. And they let me run it. And there were 10 recipes, one for each decade. And that was it. I just said, I want to do this full time. And so I just launched in. And then there was this thing called, maybe you've heard of it, the World Wide Web,
I've
right?
heard of it.
Heard of it?
Yeah.
And back then it was just like, I remember having speeds of, I think it was 14.4,
God.
dial up with that
Oh, yeah.
sound. So I thought, hey, I'm going to create one of these things called a website, because then I could maybe get editors to come there and see what I've written.
Yeah.
Editors didn't come, but the public did. And what they latched onto was that first Portuguese article, and then one for the Washington Post about piri piri, one for the LA Times eventually on other Portuguese food. And so I just started going down the Portuguese path, thinking that's what people wanted. And it just built from there. I mean, this is before Google, Facebook. I think there was something called Alta Vista or Lycos was the search engines back
Wow.
then. I mean, some of your listeners weren't even born then.
Yeah.
And that's how it built. It was just all built on instinct and built on what people were asking from me of recipes, because they too didn't want to lose their Portuguese recipes.
Wow.
And that's how it sort of launched.
Is that how Leite's Culinaria launched? Was it originally
Exactly.
Portuguese
Leite's
recipes?
Exactly.
I think I read that in your bio. Did you say it launched in 1999? I was like, no, that can't be true.
Yes. Yeah, it wasn't like 2019. 1999. Yes, like I said, older than some of your readers.
Amazing. And it since went on to become multiple James Beard Awards. And here you are today in your career. What is it today that really ignites your fire? Or what are you finding very interesting today?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. For 25 years, I've done the publishing route. I've done the writing route. I've done the cookbook. I've done the memoir. The thing that's starting to really get me excited, and I just had my first one, is teaching online, teaching cooking online. And the first class was 4 classes for the course called Cook's Taste of Portugal. And I didn't think anybody would sign up. I really didn't, but I thought, okay, let's try this. And I'm working with this team. This is what they do. And we had close to 100 people sign up. I couldn't believe it.
Amazing.
And at any given time, there were 50 to 60 people on the live classes. And then all the rest who couldn't attend watched the replays, the recordings. And it was such a high, because when you're writing, this, you're in front of your screen. You're not connected to your readers. You're not connected to your listeners. There's no voice there.
Yes.
And you don't know if what you're saying is coming out of your mouth and landing like lead balloons on the floor. You don't know.
Yep.
Because a lot of people love your work, let's say, but they don't necessarily write or respond.
Absolutely.
To have this feedback loop was amazing. And even though we asked people, they could ask questions all they wanted. And I had a moderator because it's kind of hard with 60, 70 people on. But we also have office hours. Once a week, we're having office hours where we could just chat together face to face. And that was such a high, because you connected, and immediately somebody could ask a question, you could answer it, or you realize there's a real need here. So I'll add that to the next class, or I'll create a new class that deals with whatever they're talking about. So that is really where I think I want to push some of my energies toward.
It's so funny, because of all the things that I would answer, it's that connection. So I'm not doing group classes, but I recently launched one-on-one sessions. And it was like you just voiced exactly why. Because all of these thoughts in my head, recipes in my head, they go out into the world. That's great. But what I was really aching for was more connection. This is why I love this podcast so much, because I get this connection. But I also wanted to foster that with people who could use more support. So it so resonates with me, because as a writer, as a recipe developer, it just kind of goes out there. And sometimes it's like, who knows? Who knows?
Exactly. And then you look at the recipe, and it has, like, I have some that are like 100 and something thousand shares, and there's all these likes and stuff, but there aren't a lot of comments. And you're like, okay, what do you guys like about this? You don't know. This gives me the opportunity directly to ask. And then also to ask the folks, what do you want me to do
What do you want next?
What is it that you want me to do? I'm happy to do whatever it is. And so it becomes student directed, which is great. And a need is being fulfilled, which is wonderful. And also in my classes, if we don't have fun, it's laugh and learn is what the tagline is. If we don't laugh and have a good time, then I'm doing something wrong. Because I think cooking should be fun.
Oh, I love it. Well, I love it because you just named like two of my big themes as a creator,
Mm-hmm.
and that's connection
Yes.
and joy. Those are, and
Yes.
that's why the kitchen for me is such a playground for me to grow as obviously as a cook, but also just as a human because it
Mm-hmm.
offers such opportunity for both of those
It
things.
does. It does.
As this is like a great segue into our Thanksgiving
Okay.
topic
Nice
today.
seg there. Nice seg there, Nikki.
I feel like Thanksgiving can be a great segue into connection and joy, but as we know, there's a lot more,
Pain in the butt. Pain in the butt.
Yeah, a lot more tied to this. So let's first talk about, did you celebrate Thanksgiving growing up in a Portuguese household?
We did. We celebrated Thanksgiving. My dad didn't like turkey, so we never had turkey.
Okay.
And we had stuffing. It was kind of a Portuguese stuffing, which is very different, but it wasn't the American stuffing. There were no sweet potatoes. There were no green bean casseroles. None of what you consider as kind of traditional American. It would be the capon, or sometimes my dad would like carne asada, just beef that had been slowly cooked, and roasted potatoes and Portuguese spices and oils, and no dessert. My mom does not bake. Or did not bake. My mom's still around. My dad passed, and my dad wasn't a sweet guy. So the idea of like pumpkin pie, it just wasn't there. So there was not a lot of Americana to our Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It was very much a thankful day. And that was very much. But as far as any kind of traditions I brought forward, no. The only thing I think I brought forward was the idea of being with family and friends. But that's the only connection I have to my childhood Thanksgivings.
Interesting. So when did you start to create your own notion of Thanksgiving?
When I met my partner, Alan, who everyone knows is the one online, 31 years ago.
Oh,
31. Hear that, Al? 31 years ago. He's out in the other room. Thanksgiving is his favorite holiday. He loved Thanksgiving because we were living in New York City. Before we met, he was on the Upper West Side. So every Thanksgiving, he'd invite friends over the day before Thanksgiving and watch the balloons being blown up. This is before it became a real touristy thing. And then he'd have friends over and then they would do things. So he loved Thanksgiving. So when we got together right away, it was, let's dive into American Thanksgiving. And he loves American desserts. He loves Americana. And so that's when it started. That's when we started figuring things out. I had just started taking cooking classes. This is how old I am. I went to Peter Kump's cooking school.
Wow.
Before it became the Institute of Culinary Education. And then later I went to the French Culinary Institute, avocational, not professionally. And that's when we started building it. So 31 years ago is when we started building the traditions.
31 years ago.
1993.
Wow. Now, did you start hosting immediately? What has that been like? Have you always hosted Thanksgiving? Do you go to friends?
That's a good question. I think in the beginning, like I said, I was still young, thin, and beautiful. I wasn't eating. So I don't think we hosted. I think we went to visited friends. I remember one time we visited friends. Yeah, we visited friends on our first year. We visited friends in Shelter Island. That was it. And I remember the only place they had for us to sleep was on the porch outside. It was like a screened in porch. It was freezing. And they made all the stuff. And it was a wonderful Thanksgiving. And it was very much an Americana kind of Thanksgiving. And after that, I think we got the bug. And so like 1994, I would say, is when we started either potlucking it with other people or inviting people over. And I started about that time was when I went to Peter Kump's. So yeah, we started hosting, but it wasn't like the event that we do now because I didn't know how to do it back then.
Okay.
And boiling water would send me into a nervous breakdown. So it was a slow kind of process.
You just said something that very much sparked my interest. The event that it is now.
The event that it is.
What is this event that it is now, David?
Well, we haven't had it because, of course, COVID. So prior to COVID, we would have 10 or 12 people over and I would cook for days and days and days. I would start, and this is really kind of what I'd like to talk about too, if we can, about how to plan for Thanksgiving.
Yes, I definitely want to talk about this. Let's get into it.
Saturday morning is when I would cook, and I would just go Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then when it came to Thanksgiving, it took many years to perfect this. Trust me, many, many years, because there were some years where guests are coming over and the turkey is still raw.
Yeah.
And pink inside, and a cocktail hour becomes cocktail, half day kind of thing. And people are so sloshed by the time they eat. And sometimes it's like cooked way before and it's dry. But now it is when Thanksgiving happens, we wake up, we make breakfast, we watch the parade. And at about 1 o'clock, all that's left to do is cook the turkey and reheat sides. That's it.
Yes.
Everything
That's
else is done.
exactly how
But
I do it too.
took me that long. So because of that, I'm able to have a much larger one. So this year, because my mom's in Massachusetts and now is in a nursing home, I'm going to be going there, I think, for Thanksgiving or the day before. So we're having Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving Friday, which I
Okay.
guess is Black Friday, right? That's
Yeah,
Black
I think
Friday.
it is.
So
Yes.
no one's probably going to show up, but that's when we're doing it. So all of our friends will be coming over on Friday, and that will be the big Thanksgiving for us.
Okay, so let's talk about prep because just
Sure.
like you, I have a whole timeline. I share this with my subscribers. I have a timeline, I have my recipes. And for me, the make ahead aspect of Thanksgiving is really key because we have a small Thanksgiving. It's just our in-laws and our close-knit family. And even within that, I want Thanksgiving to be a day filled with ease and joy. I want the whole process to be filled with ease. I had many years of stressing over Thanksgiving, and I had to really renegotiate my relationship with the holidays in general to make them something that felt nourishing again for me. And so that meant simple, streamlined, do-ahead recipes. Let's talk about your prep strategy. I know that this year it's probably going to be the Monday, but say this is a traditional year where you're starting your prep on Saturday. What are you doing that Saturday?
Usually the Saturdays, I will make the pie crusts. There's a pumpkin cake with maple cream cheese frosting that my husband loves and everyone does. So I'll bake the cake. And that day, I probably will make the cranberry sauce. Or actually, he makes it, but we make it on the Saturday. So that way, we got the pie crust, the cake itself done, and then the cranberries. The pie crust and the cake get frozen. And the cranberry sauce just hangs out in the refrigerator. And it only gets better over time, too.
I agree.
The flavors marry and they hold hands beautifully. And then on Sunday, I'll move on to some of the other elements. Like I may do some pre-chopping, let's say, on some of the things. Or if it's something like if I want to make a sweet potato casserole, I'll bake the sweet potatoes then and then cover them, put them in the refrigerator.
That's
if
a great
I'm
tip.
doing a green bean casserole, I might steam the green beans. Do that. Oh, also too, one of the things I do on Saturday and Sundays, I make a turkey gravy.
Yes.
I just buy turkey wings, necks, anything I can find, and I'll roast them in the oven with a bunch of vegetables, get them all nice and dark, take them out, I'll throw them in a pot, and I'll just simmer it and simmer it, skim it, simmer it, simmer and simmer. And then I'll just make a roux or like a beurre mayonnaise, which is butter and flour together, thicken it up, get it all the way I want it, nicely seasoned. It goes in the refrigerator and there's no need for this last minute pan tripping, gravies, glumpy stuff that happens all the time.
To me, this is such a great tip. And this is something I do as well. It's like make that turkey stock. And you, like you said, you can even use chicken wings.
You can,
but
absolutely.
To me, nothing is worse than like, you're finally in your nice clothes. You're sitting down, ready to eat, and then you got to make the gravy. That's like a no. That's a hard no for me.
Yeah, it is a hard no. And we have been known, actually, there's a column on the site called Never Cook Naked, which came out of us practically naked before we start having guests over, right before they come, because you don't want to get your clothes dirty. And everything's flattering on you and it's just ridiculous. So we don't do that. So the stock is made and then the gravy's made. And sometimes stock is being used for like a soup or something.
Yeah.
If there's a soup, that'll be made during that weekend. And then as we get closer, so on Monday will be the frosting for the cake, let's say, and then it gets a little bit more of the elements being combined, but still not fully. So like I said, with the green bean casserole, I would make the mushroom soup that everyone uses. I'll make my own with a bechamel sauce and I'll saute the mushrooms. So I'll get that going, put it in the refrigerator. And then if there's carrots or something, those will be prepped like on the Monday or the Tuesday. And then Wednesday, everything comes together. The cake will be frosted. The pies will be made. The casseroles will be assembled. So the sweet potato casserole will be assembled. My husband loves the marshmallows on top, so I don't put them on until Thanksgiving when I heat it up. And the stuffing will be made too. I make that like 2 days ahead, the stuffing, because it always tastes so much better. And the stock from Saturday goes into the stuffing.
Nailed it.
There's exactly. So then I'll have like sausage. Sometimes I did it with oysters. And then sometimes I'll make a Portuguese stuffing, which is with Portuguese chorizo, which is a pork sausage. And I'll make that ahead of time. So that is all prepped and all ready and all done like 2 days before. Mashed potatoes are made like on the Tuesday because they can simply be reheated in a double boiler. So all those elements, the potatoes, the casseroles, the sweet potatoes, the soup, if we're having it, are all done. And then on Wednesday, it's all assembled and they're all made. So then all I have to do on Thursday is reheat them, whatever has to be reheated. So the mashed potatoes go in a double boiler. The casseroles will go in the oven with foil on it to heat up, warm through. And then the last thing is the turkey. And we do a dry brine turkey, which I did for the first time last year. Never did it. Amy Traversa, who is the host of my podcast, Talking with My Mouth Full, she said, you got to try it. So we tried it last year. It was sensational.
Yeah.
And so easy. So I did that. And then so all that I have left to do is just cook the turkey, take a shower, take things out of the oven. Luckily, we have double ovens, which is great, and then serve it. The one thing I don't like to do, because I'm not good at, is carving the turkey. So we have a friend of ours, Maddie. He will carve, and he was a butcher for years, so it's perfect and beautiful. And then right after everybody leaves, we strip the turkey down off the bones, save the bones for stock and everything. And then I put together, I'll get all the elements, and the next day I will make a Thanksgiving pot pie.
So many things I want to circle back to. The dry brine of the turkey. This is the only way I do turkey, because a brine really does make a difference. And so if you think about having to submerge a turkey in a freshwater brine, that's an insane amount of fridge space. People do it in coolers and all of this. And I'm like, no. When I worked with fine cooking years ago, they taught me that technique. I have never gone back. So I think that's something that's so easy that people can do. You can easily find a dry brine recipe online. And what it does is it seeps into the meat. So that salt gets into the meat. You're going to have a much juicier and more flavorful turkey. What I've started doing, I think, for the past 5 years is when I get the turkey from our local farm, I break it down. So I cut out the backbone and I usually break it into legs and a big breast. And I love to roast it that way because I have more control. So that way they all kind of cook more evenly.
They do,
I think this year I'm just going to spatchcock it, which just means flattening it and putting it on a thing and throwing it in the oven. I usually do, softened butter and a bunch of herbs under the skin, but I think playing with the turkey is kind of fun. But then the other thing you mentioned is that night, that day, before the carcass goes in the fridge and gets all hard, to pick the meat off the bones, which I know sounds like kind of a pain. It kind of sounds annoying. But then you've got all of that fresh meat that is ready to go the next day for a pot pie or for a stew or for a soup, because it's so much harder to mentally do that, I feel like, the next day, but also physically, once that thing gets hardened in the fridge, it's really hard to get that meat off the bone.
It is. Have you ever tried, if you're breaking your turkey apart, have you ever tried to braise the dark meat and roast the light meat?
I have, yes.
I love that too.
That's a delicious thing to do. I feel like my in-laws and my husband like the more traditional roasted meat. I think if it were up to me, I would braise the legs. I've even confit the legs, like duck confit. And so you cook them in fat. And that's great because you can do the salt herb rub days ahead, and you kind of cure them, and then you slow cook them in the fat. And they're like so amazing.
Which fat do you use? Duck fat?
Yes. Tubs of duck fat, which I used to get from our local cheesemonger.
Excellent idea.
Okay, so let's go back to pie and dessert, because that happens to be my favorite thing.
Mine too.
You said you make that pumpkin cake, which just sounds divine. What pies do you make?
It'll depend upon the year, but usually a pecan pie, but I don't like just pecan pie, I like chocolate pecan pie. So I like to do that. I've also made pumpkin pies. Oh, one thing I make that I developed a couple of years ago, and some people actually, that's their favorite, is it's a long title, pumpkin meringue pie ice cream. So it's a pumpkin ice cream, and the meringue you would use like fluff or marshmallow. But then for the pie part, I will make a graham cracker crust or a chocolate Oreo crust. But instead of putting it in a pan, I just put it flat on a sheet pan and then bake it. And I break it apart so it shards. And I mix it in. So you get the crust, you get the pumpkin, you get the meringue. It's so wonderful. So I sometimes have done that.
Amazing.
And then there's a lemon curd torte that I make. People love. So sometimes people ask for that.
Okay.
And so I'll make that. So it really depends upon the year. But to me, Thanksgiving is about the stuffing, the mashed potatoes, and the dessert. It's never been the turkey.
Turkey. No, you're right. It's not about that.
Never. It's always the carbs.
Absolutely. It's always the carbs. Yeah. Pie is my favorite food. So I always do a pumpkin pie and either a traditional double crust apple pie or an apple crumb pie.
Yeah.
Okay, another question, because this is the thing that gets me.
Mm.
Appetizers. Do you do
Yes.
appetizers? Do you not do
I used to do, I was one of those people who had like 18 cheeses out,
Yeah.
and all kinds of crackers. And please enjoy yourself, people. And nobody was hungry by the time
Yeah,
Thanksgiving rolled around,
right.
the
It
meal
kills
rolled
me.
around.
Yeah.
So now what I do is if I serve it, I make these gougere with thyme, rosemary, a little bit of oregano, and prosciutto and Parmesan cheese. And so the nice little cheese puffs, people will eat that as still. I just limit it. So when they're done, and I just have a lot of, we always start our parties or our dinner parties with some form of bubbles. And we like cava and Prosecco more than champagne. So we always start that. And that's really it. And I got it down now so that it's pretty well timed that when people are arriving and having the hors d'oeuvres or having the gougere, the turkey was just taken out. So all it's doing is resting for 25, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, depending upon the size. And so everything's taken care of.
Oh,
So
that's
it's pretty
so nice.
seamless. And so, yeah, I'm not big on that. If we
Yeah.
do anything for like an appetizer, well, I'm thinking more of hors d'oeuvres. You said appetizers. If we do something for appetizers, it will only be a soup.
Okay.
Because by the time you finish that first course, you're already full.
Yes.
And so it'll be a soup. And usually it's a pumpkin cider soup or a pumpkin soup. And sometimes I will do spiced pumpkin seeds, which my dad used to do, and I put it on top. But usually, no. It's usually from the hors d'oeuvres right to the meal.
Yeah.
And we're not forgive me, people, we are not a football family.
No, we're not either.
We watch the dog show or the cat show. That's what we're into. And so no one's hanging out waiting for that. And the interesting thing is we like nighttime Thanksgivings. Do you like daytime or nighttime?
We usually eat at 5. So it's, an early dinner, but it's still a dinner. It's not like a lunch situation. I don't like the in between. I get confused.
Right. Yeah. Is it lunch? Is it dinner?
Right.
Because when I grew up, Thanksgiving was 12 o'clock.
Oh,
in New England,
wow.
a lot of people in New England are 12 o'clock. That's when you start. And no, we don't do that. So we like to start about 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And people are here, 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night. And it's so lovely.
You know what we did last year, which is something we do at Christmas. So at Christmas, I'm with my entire extended family. But for Thanksgiving, it's just us and my in-laws. And my mother-in-law loves cheese. She loves cheese. But I was finding that you put out this cheese board before Thanksgiving, and then here you put all this effort into the meal. And then by the time people sit down, they're not hungry.
Exactly.
So I put the cheese board out at noon. I put it out at noon. And we have the hors d'oeuvres and maybe even a glass of wine at noon. And then we putter about, we take a walk, and then, there might be a few little nibbles before dinner, like something really simple, little smoked salmon or something really simple. But then, that's kind of like we get the cheese and sausage board because they stay with us. They're here.
Yeah.
Why not do it then?
Sure. That's very smart. We usually are either we're guests or guests come to us.
Yeah.
So we don't have,
that's different.
Rarely do we have like an overnight guest. So that is a very clever way of handling it. Very smart.
I have another question for you, and this is veering into a more personal realm.
Sure.
If you're up for that.
Of course.
As we know, the holidays can be such a stressful time of year. Yeah. They can be such an amazing time of year, but we all have I feel like it's a time when grief and other emotions can really bubble up. And
depression.
You wrote very openly about depression in a beautiful, beautiful essay on Substack earlier this year.
Thanks.
How do you prepare emotionally for the holidays? And when or if some of those heavy emotions, you said they start to slither in, you used that word, and I just felt that was so beautifully poignant. If that happens, what are some tools that you turn to?
Sure. It's a great question. And I hope this can help folks. One thing people, I think, need to embrace is that it's the time of the year when most people, the greatest number of people do experience depression, or they do experience some sort of intense emotions, grief, because it's a family time. A lot of family stuff comes up. So one thing I always remember is that I'm not alone. Number one, if I'm feeling down at that point, it's like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm one of millions of people who are maybe feeling like this right now. So that, for me, that identification with others always lightens my load. And the things that I've learned over the years, because the Thanksgiving, it used to be the most stressful time. From Thanksgiving to New Year's, it was so stressful that by the time, January 2nd rolled around, I just wanted to hibernate for a month. What I've tried to embrace now is that if I can't do it, I can't do it. If I can't make 18 dishes or 12 dishes, I can't. And there are times where if friends of mine, very good friends of mine, let's say, and I'm like, I am just not in the mood to host. Would you host? Sometimes I do that. So I just make sure I try to take care of myself. I'm not doing it very well lately because there's been so many things that have been kind of log jamming in our life with health stuff and my mom and everything. And so I'm not doing good as I could right now. But I do try to just realize that I have my limits and it's okay to not do it all. I think people get really wrapped up in a competition with themselves.
Yes.
Or even sometimes other people like, well, my sister did it last year. I'm going to do it better this year or something like that. That's all useless because it doesn't help. And then if you are really being dragged under by that undertow, to just understand it's happening and it's all right. And just let the people who love you and know around you know what's going on. And then also to remember that this too will pass. There's never been a depression that I've sunk into that I've not gotten out of. It's just, I think, I can't say that for everybody. I don't know. But for me, I've always come around again. And some of the other things I try and do is I try to entertain myself endlessly. If I'm really in a bad place, I love to watch, I'm one of those crazy people. I love to watch cat videos. I love cat videos. I'll watch America's Funniest Videos. I'll watch old classic comedies. I'll watch Will and Grace all over again from the very beginning or something until I feel better. Because I feel that every moment that you can be out of yourself and experiencing what's around you versus being inside of yourself, watching everything is one step closer to feeling better. It's very hard when you're depressed because basically you almost feel as if you're watching everything and you're watching yourself. And the idea of getting engaged with what's around you, even for a bit, like so many times I've told my husband, I don't want to go to such and such's house. I'm not in the mood. I'm too depressed. And he'll say, you have to go. You just have to go. Just go for an hour, then we can come home. And more times than not, I ended up having such a good time that I forget about it. And I may be depressed the next day, but you know what? I felt good for a nice stretch. And that makes me realize that I can feel good for a longer stretch. And thank God, I'm so lucky. I'm not experiencing them the way I used to. As a matter of fact, I'm off of almost all but one of the psychiatric medications that I was on. I was on 4 or 5 and I'm only on 1 now. And I'm really grateful. And so those are some of the things that I do. Everyone is, if you feel that you're in danger, reach out. Reach out. That's the most important thing. You are not alone. You're not alone in this.
David, I've just got so many chills because those tips are simple. And yet so profound. Even that if we tell ourselves and we honor this statement, if I can't do it, I can't do it. If we can be honest with ourselves and give ourselves the grace, like you said, whether that means you cut back on the number of dishes, whether that means you decide not to host, whatever that means for you. If you can't do it, you can't do it. I think those words are so powerful. And then to this idea of entertaining ourselves, what will bring you the joy or the sense of getting out of your own space into something that feels lighter? So beautiful.
I remember in my memoir, I talked about sometimes getting in the kitchen would help. And I remember writing something along the lines of just watching a knob of butter slump from the middle to the edge of the pan sometimes just made me feel better because I knew that in a half hour, an hour, depending what I was cooking or baking, something would exist in the world that didn't exist before. And I created it. It's just a validation of the I am. And I remember that. And I remember I wrote that sentence and I didn't think much of it until so many people responded to it. And I thought, wow, okay. Yeah. So it's the validation of the I am a cook. I am a person. I am a baker. I just created this. I did that. So energy is being transferred out of you into something else. And I think that's incredibly healing.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's the heart of what creativity is,
Yes.
making something that didn't exist, taking part
Mhm.
of you, using your energy and creating something. And it's a loving gesture.
Hmm.
It's a loving action. It's an act of self-love.
Oh, beautiful. I feel like this is why I cook. This is,
Mhm,
to me, the act of being in my senses, but also the act of engaging with food and the act of creating
mhm,
something feels very healing in my
mhm.
life. And I
Yeah,
know that's not the same for everybody, but
yeah,
what a beautiful opportunity.
yeah. And for some people, it might be gardening.
Yeah.
For some people, it might be some sort of craft, knitting, crochet, stamp collecting.
Hmm.
There's, excuse me, there are actions that we can take that, even as the smallest smidgen of joy, do it, hang on to it, and then build on that. If you can just see that one pinprick of light out of that action, there's a whole sun behind that pinprick. You just got to keep going.
David, thank you so much. What
Oh,
a
my pleasure.
beautiful end to this conversation. And maybe the most important prep tip of all, I think, of everything we talked about,
Yeah,
to really pay attention to ourselves emotionally and to give ourselves grace this time of year and to allow the holidays to be what it is and to
exactly.
maybe set aside all these expectations and
Yes.
everything that consumerism is going to make us believe the holiday is, but
Yeah.
allow it to be what it is for us in our lives right now.
A dear friend of mine once said to me, make no appointments, have no disappointments. Meaning that if
Hmm.
you have no expectations, you're never going to be disappointed.
Mhm.
And I don't know, we all think somehow this Thanksgiving, this Christmas, this year's Christmas swap, cookie swap, this year's it's going to be so great. And when it just misses the mark, it's as
Mhm.
if it's horrible.
Yeah.
And if you have no expectation, all that's left is the ability to enjoy because you had no expectation.
Mm. Let's end this on that note because I can't think of anything wiser. Thank you so much, David.
My pleasure, Nikki. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If this work resonates with you in any way, you can support it by leaving a review or comment or sharing it with friends. Also, you can sign up for the newsletter, Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. And by becoming a paid member for just $5 a month, you help fund this entire project. Thank you so much to all of you who are already subscribed, especially to those paid subscribers. This work could not happen without you. I'm Nikki Sizemore, and as always, remember to nourish yourself with intention and love.